Captain Rodriguez walked slowly around the old ship, her boots echoing in the empty hangar bay. The used Defiance sat there like a forgotten relic, her metal hull showing 40 years of service. Paint was peeling off in places, and you could see where repair patches had been welded over battle scars from conflicts. Most people had forgotten about the other officers at the station barely looked at the Defiance anymore. When the sleek new battleships came through, everyone rushed to see them. Their hulls gleamed like mirrors and their weapon systems could destroy entire fleets, but the Defiance? She was just another old patrol ship that nobody cared about. Rodriguez had been commanding this vessel for 3 years now. Every morning, she watched the news feeds showing off humanity's latest and greatest warships. Ships with crews of thousands, captains who got invited to fancy ceremonies, and enough firepower to level planets. Meanwhile, her ship got the jobs nobody else wanted: routine patrols along the quiet borders, checking on mining stations, escorting cargo ships through empty space. The crew of 180 people had gotten used to being ignored. When they docked at major stations, other crews would walk past them without a second glance. Young officers fresh from the academy would point and whisper about the museum piece that somehow still flew. Some of the newer captains didn't even know the Defiance existed until they saw her in the duty roster, but Rodriguez knew something those fancy officers didn't. Her chief engineer Thompson had been working on this ship for 22 years. Every day after his official duties ended, he would disappear into the engine rooms with his tools and his crazy ideas. The man was a genius who never got the recognition he deserved because he preferred fixing things to talking about them. Thompson had quietly upgraded every major system on the ship. The fusion reactor now produced 40% more power than it was supposed to. The weapons could charge to levels that would make the safety inspectors faint. The engines could push the old destroyer faster than ships half her age, and the best part? None of it was in any official records. Lieutenant Kim ran the tactical systems, and she was just as sneaky as Thompson. While other officers studied by the book combat strategies, she experimented with weapon combinations that weren't supposed to work. She found ways to make their outdated missiles hit harder than modern ones. She discovered firing patterns that could overwhelm enemy defenses using equipment everyone else had written off as useless. The ship's doctor, Patel, had turned the medical bay into something that could handle injuries no standard facility was equipped for. The communications officer had boosted their sensors so they could see things happening 3 systems away. Even the cook had figured out how to make food that actually tasted good using rations that were older than some of the crew members. They were a family of misfits on a ship that time had forgotten. And they liked it that way. Mel Chun's latest briefing came through on a Tuesday morning. Rodriguez gathered her senior officers in the cramped conference room to watch the transmission. Chun looked tired like he always did these days. The core worlds were demanding better protection, and the fleet was stretched thin trying to cover everything. The new battle group will handle the major shipping lanes, Chun explained, pointing to a star map that showed the important parts of human space. The 7th Fleet will guard the industrial worlds. The 3rd Fleet will patrol the inner colonies. He paused and looked directly into the camera. The Outer Rim patrols will continue as scheduled. Stay alert, but don't expect any trouble out there. Rodriguez almost laughed. Don't expect trouble. That was military speak for nothing important happens where you are. The Outer Rim was where they sent ships that were too old to matter, commanded by officers who would never make admiral. Crewed by people the fleet didn't know what to do with. After the briefing ended, Thompson shook his head. 40 years I've been fixing ships, he said. And they still think newer always means better. Kim pulled up the tactical display showing the ship's real capabilities versus what the fleet computers thought they had. The difference was impressive. According to official records, the Defiance was barely combat-worthy. In reality, she could probably take on 2 modern destroyers and win. Maybe it's better this way, Rodriguez said. Let them think we're harmless. Let them send us to the quiet sectors where nothing happens. At least we know what this ship can really do. But something was happening in the quiet sectors. Long range Sensors had been picking up strange readings for weeks. Ships that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Energy signatures that didn't match anything in their databases. When Rodriguez filed reports about these contacts, headquarters told her it was probably just sensor malfunctions or space debris. The first colony to go silent was New Perth, a mining world with 12,000 people. When the regularly scheduled supply ship arrived, they found empty cities and no signs of what had happened to anyone. The fleet sent a single investigation ship, which reported finding some kind of advanced technology before it too went silent. Then it was New Dublin. 25,000 colonists gone without a trace. This time, the investigation team found evidence of massive energy weapons that had carved through buildings like they were made of paper. The fleet sent 2 ships to investigate. Neither one came back. Rodriguez watched the news feeds as panic started spreading through the colonies. The talking heads on the military networks kept saying everything was under control. Admiral Morrison, the fleet's golden boy with his brand new flagship, gave confident speeches about how human technology was the best in the galaxy and how no enemy could threaten the core worlds. But Rodriguez had been in space long enough to recognize the signs. Someone was testing humanity's defenses. They were picking off isolated colonies to see how quickly the fleet would respond and what kind of ships they would send. Each attack was getting bigger and bolder when the sensor readings changed from ghosts and shadows to solid contacts. Rodriguez knew their quiet days were over. The readings showed hundreds of ships, maybe thousands, moving in perfect formation toward human space. They were still months away, but they were coming. She called a meeting with her department heads. These weren't the kind of officers who got invited to strategy sessions at fleet headquarters. They were the people who made broken things work, who found solutions when there weren't supposed to be any, who kept an old ship running when everyone else said it should be scrapped. I think we're about to find out if all those upgrades Thompson's been working on actually work, she told them. Because something tells me we're going to need every advantage we can get. Thompson grinned. He'd been waiting years for someone to ask what his old ship could really do. Kim was already running calculations, figuring out how to use their hidden weapons in ways that would surprise anyone who thought they knew what the Defiance was capable of. Outside the porthole, space looked peaceful and empty. But Rodriguez could feel something coming. Something that would change everything for humanity. And when it arrived, they might discover that the ship everyone ignored was exactly what they needed. The first thing Rodriguez noticed was how quiet the communication channels had become. For 3 days, they'd been listening to the chatter between Admiral Morrison's fleet and command headquarters. Confident voices discussing battle plans, positioning reports, and tactical assessments. The kind of professional military talk that made you feel like everything was under control. Then the silence started. At 0800 hours. The fleet made contact with the unknown Armada near Proxima Station. The enemy had finally shown themselves in full force, and the sight made Rodriguez's blood run cold. 500 ships, each one bigger than anything humanity had ever built. Their hulls were dark metal that seemed to absorb light, and they moved in perfect formation, like they were all controlled by a single mind. Morrison's voice came through the speakers one last time, full of that same confidence that had made him the fleet's poster boy. All ships, engage the enemy. Show them what human engineering can do. His flagship, the Warrior's Pride, led the charge with its massive guns blazing. Rodriguez and her crew watched the battle unfold on their long-range sensors. At first, it looked like the human fleet might actually have a chance. Their ships were fast and their weapons were hitting targets, but something was wrong. The enemy seemed to know exactly what they were going to do before they did it. Every time Morrison tried a flanking maneuver, the aliens were already moving to counter it. When Captain Hayes attempted to use the asteroid field for cover, enemy ships were waiting in ambush. It was like the aliens could see the future, or at least predict every move the human commanders would make. Thompson watched the sensor data with growing horror. They're not just winning, he said quietly. They're playing with them, like a cat with a mouse. The alien weapons were unlike anything in human experience. Instead of projectiles or energy beams, they fired some kind of adaptive plasma that changed its properties based on what it hit. Human shields that could stop nuclear warheads crumpled like paper. Armor that had protected ships for decades melted away like ice in summer. Lieutenant Kim ran calculations on her tactical computer, trying to understand what they were seeing. "Their weapons are learning," she reported. "Each shot is more effective than the last. They're analyzing our defenses in real time and adjusting." The first human ship to die was the destroyer Relentless. One moment she was firing full salvos at an enemy cruiser, the next she was the expanding cloud of debris. No explosion, no final transmission, just there 1 second and gone the next. The crew of 150 people simply ceased to exist. It was the heavy cruiser Determination. Captain Walsh had been Rodriguez's classmate at the academy 20 years ago. They'd served together on their first assignment, sharing stories about home and dreams about making the galaxy safer for humanity. Now Walsh's ship broke apart in complete silence, her crew's voices cut off mid-sentence. The battle lasted 6 hours, but Rodriguez knew it was over after the first 30 minutes. Morrison's tactical genius meant nothing when the enemy could predict his every move. The fleet's superior training was useless when alien weapons could adapt to any defense. Even their courage and determination couldn't overcome technology that was simply beyond human understanding. Admiral Morrison's final transmission came at 47 hours. His voice was steady, but Rodriguez could hear the defeat behind his words. "All remaining ships fall back to Rally Point 7. We've lost 60% of the fleet. Repeat, withdraw to Rally Point 7. But there was no Rally Point 7 anymore. The aliens had already moved to cut off the retreat routes. Ship after ship tried to escape, only to run into enemy formations that seemed to know exactly where they were going. The few vessels that did get away were mostly damaged and limping, their crews traumatized by watching their comrades die. The warrior's pride lasted longer than most, simply because she was the biggest target, and the aliens seemed to want to save her for last. Morrison tried everything he knew. Ramming attacks, coordinated strikes, even desperate kamikaze runs by damaged ships trying to give their flagship time to escape. Nothing worked. When the end came, it was almost anticlimactic. The alien flagship, a massive vessel 3 times the size of any human ship, simply pointed its main weapon at the warrior's pride and fired once. The most advanced battleship humanity had ever built vanished in a flash of light. That could be seen from 3 star systems away. Rodriguez had to turn away from the sensor display. She'd watched the entire human battle fleet get destroyed in less than a day. Ships she'd served on, captains she'd shared drinks with, crews who'd become legends in the academy textbooks, all gone. The aftermath was chaos. Fleet headquarters tried to maintain communication with the scattered survivors, but half the command structure was dead or missing. Emergency protocols kicked in, promoting junior officers to positions they'd never trained for, giving regional commanders authority over whatever ships they could find for the Outer Rim. That meant Rodriguez found herself the senior officer in a sector that contained exactly 15 ships. None of them were battleships. Most weren't even proper military vessels. She had old destroyers like her own, a few converted cargo ships with basic weapons, and some patrol boats that were barely armed at all. Captain Barnes commanded the converted freighter Lucky Strike, which had been hauling mining equipment until someone welded gun turrets to her hull. Captain Wong flew the corvette Scrappy, a tiny ship that was fast but couldn't take a hit from anything bigger than a pistol. Captain O'Coffer's patrol boat Tenacious had been guarding shipping lanes until yesterday, when shipping lanes stopped mattering because there might not be any ships left to use them. They gathered for a video conference that felt more like a funeral than a military briefing. These weren't the kind of officers who showed up in recruitment videos. They were the people who did the unglamorous jobs, who kept the frontier safe while the famous captains got all the attention. "So," Barnes said after a long silence, "I guess we're all that's left." Wong laughed, but there was no humor in it. 15 ships against 500. And their 500 just destroyed our best fleet like it was target practice. The tactical Analysis was clear. The alien armada was heading straight for Earth, moving at a steady pace that suggested they weren't worried about any remaining human resistance. Why should they be? They'd just proven that humanity's best technology best. Tactics and best commanders weren't good enough to slow them down. Rodriguez looked at the faces on her screen. These were good people, experienced officers who'd spent their careers being overlooked by the fleet hierarchy. They commanded ships that were too old, too small, or too unconventional for the glory missions, but they were all humanity had left. Here's what I think, she said finally. The aliens beat Morrison because they could predict everything he did. Standard tactics, by-the-book formations, the kind of fighting they teach at the academy, but nobody taught them how to fight ships like ours. Thompson nodded slowly. Ships that aren't supposed to work the way they actually work. Ships crewed by people who've been making impossible things happen for their entire careers, Kim added. Outside Rodriguez's porthole, space looked the same as always. Empty and peaceful, full of stars that had been shining since before humans learned to build fires. But somewhere out there, an alien armada was coming to end everything humanity had ever accomplished. The question was whether 15 forgotten ships and their crews of misfits could do what the entire fleet couldn't. Rodriguez looked at her officers and made a decision that would either save humanity or get them all killed trying. Rodriguez hadn't slept in 3 days. Coffee cups littered her desk as she went through the battle recordings for the 100th time, looking for something everyone else had missed. The alien fleet was still 2 weeks away from Earth, moving at their own pace like they had all the time in the world. And maybe they did. The recordings from Proxima Station played on repeat. She watched Morrison's ships get torn apart again and again, trying to understand exactly how the aliens had done it. Frame by frame, she analyzed every weapon hit, every tactical decision, every moment when human technology had failed against something beyond their understanding. Thompson found her there at 0300, staring at a paused image of the Warrior's Pride's final moments. Captain, you need to get some rest. Look at this, she said, pointing to the screen. Right here, when Morrison tries the Delta formation. The aliens start moving to counter it before he even gives the order. Thompson squinted at the tactical display. Yeah, we noticed that too. Their computers are fast. No, it's not about speed. Rodriguez rewound the footage again. Watch their lead ship. It starts turning exactly 43 seconds before Morrison transmits his command. That's not reaction time. That's prediction. She pulled up more examples. Every time the human fleet tried something new, the aliens were already responding to it. Not after they saw it happening, but before, like they had a playbook of every move humanity might make. They're fighting our doctrine, Rodriguez realized. Everything Morrison did, every formation he used, every tactic he tried, it's all from the Academy textbooks. Standard fleet procedures that every officer learns. Kim joined them, carrying her own stack of analysis reports. I've been thinking the same thing. Their AI system seems designed specifically to counter organized military tactics. Big formations, coordinated strikes, the kind of warfare that looks good in simulations. Rodriguez stood up and walked to the porthole. Outside, the asteroid field stretched for millions of kilometers in every direction. Chunks of rock and metal that had been drifting here for thousands of years, ignored by everyone because they weren't worth mining. What if we don't fight like a fleet? She said suddenly. Thompson and Kim exchanged glances. What do you mean? Morrison lost because he fought the way admirals are supposed to fight? Big formations, coordinated attacks, following the rules. But what if there are no rules? What if we fight like pirates instead of officers? She called another conference with the other captains. 15 faces appeared on her screen, each one showing the strain of the past few days. These weren't people used to making decisions that could save or doom humanity. They were used to following orders, doing their jobs, keeping their ships running despite impossible odds. Barnes spoke first. We've all seen the tactical analysis. Even if we somehow managed to destroy one alien ship, they'd adapt and make sure it never happened again. Their technology learns. So we don't give it a chance to learn, Rodriguez replied. We hit them once and disappear, hit them somewhere else and disappear again. No patterns, no formations, no coordination they can predict. Captain Chun, commanding the old patrol boat Defiant, shook his head. That's not how space combat works. You need concentrated firepower, overlapping fields of fire, coordinated timing. That's how fleet combat works, Rodriguez corrected. But we're not a fleet. We're 15 ships that shouldn't be able to hurt anything, commanded by officers nobody takes seriously, using equipment that's supposedly obsolete. She brought up a display showing their actual capabilities versus their official specifications. The difference was startling. Thompson's modifications had turned the Defiance into a ship that existed nowhere in any database. Her weapons could overcharge to levels that would destroy most modern vessels. Her engines could produce burst speeds that defied physics textbooks. Similar conversations were happening across their small group. Every captain had stories about unauthorized modifications, creative repairs and systems that worked better than they were supposed to. Decades of being ignored had given them freedom to experiment in ways that proper fleet officers never could. Wong's Corvette Scrappy was officially rated for patrol duties only. Unofficially, her engineer had figured out how to make her engines produce 3 times the rated power for short bursts. She could accelerate faster than missiles and stop on a credit chip, but only for about 10 minutes before the whole ship needed a complete overhaul. Barnes had turned his converted freighter into something between a cargo ship and a weapons platform. The Lucky Strike carried mining lasers powerful enough to cut through asteroids, but her targeting system had been modified to track moving targets. She looked harmless because she was supposed to be harmless, but those mining lasers could slice through ship hulls like butter. Captain Davis commanded the supply ship Endurance, which was supposed to carry spare parts and ammunition to other vessels. Her crew had spent years figuring out creative ways to use their cargo as weapons. Spare reactor cores made excellent improvised bombs. Maintenance drones could be programmed to carry explosives into enemy ships. Even food supplies could be weaponized. If you were desperate enough and creative enough, Rodriguez outlined her plan. Instead of fighting as a coordinated fleet, they would spread out across the asteroid field and operate as individual hunters. Each ship would pick its own targets, use its own tactics, and disappear before the aliens could respond. No communication between ships during combat, no coordinated timing, no predictable patterns. We'll fight like privateers, she explained. Hit and run attacks using whatever advantages we can find. The aliens' prediction system won't work if there's nothing to predict. Lieutenant Kim had been running calculations on her tactical computer. The math actually works, she said with surprise. If we can destroy even 5 or 6 of their ships without losing any of our own, we'll have achieved a better exchange rate than Morrison's fleet. Thompson grinned. And if their AI tries to adapt to our tactics, what's it going to learn, that we have no tactics? The plan was risky beyond belief. They were talking about 15 aging ships taking on an armada that had just destroyed humanity's best fleet, but it was also the only plan that made sense. The aliens had proven they could beat human technology and human training. Maybe they couldn't beat human stubbornness and the kind of desperate creativity that came from having nothing left to lose. Over the next week, each ship prepared in its own way. Rodriguez had Thompson push their modifications even further, adding, systems that would probably destroy the ship if they were used more than once. Kim programmed firing solutions for attacks that violated every rule of space combat. Dr. Patel prepared the medical bay for casualties that might result from their own weapons overloading. The other ships were making similar preparations. Barnes was loading his mining ship with every explosive device his crew could improvise. Wong was stripping unnecessary weight from her Corvette to make her even faster. Davis was turning her supply ship into a mobile bomb factory. They positioned themselves throughout the asteroid field, each ship hidden in the shadow of rocks large enough to mask their heat signatures. No formation, no coordination, no way for an enemy computer to predict what they might do next. They were 15 individual predators waiting for prey that had never faced anything like them. Rodriguez sat in her captain's chair, watching the long-range sensors as the alien armada approached. In a few hours, they would find out if desperation and ingenuity could triumph over superior technology. If a group of forgotten ships and overlooked officers could save humanity when its greatest heroes had failed, the aliens were coming, confident in their inevitable victory. They had no idea what was waiting for them in the darkness between the asteroids. The alien armada arrived at the outer rim like a swarm of metal locusts, their dark ships blotting out the stars. Rodriguez watched them through the Defiance's sensors, hidden behind a massive asteroid that had been drifting through space since before humans discovered fire. 500 ships in perfect formation, moving with the confidence of predators who had never met anything that could hurt them. Their lead vessels began scanning the asteroid field, looking for the small human fleet they knew was hiding somewhere in the rocks. The aliens had picked up their heat signatures days ago, but the exact locations were masked by the natural radiation from the asteroids. It didn't matter to them. They had time, overwhelming firepower, and the kind of advanced technology that had already proven unstoppable. Admiral Kethis, the alien commander, transmitted a message on all human frequencies. His voice was cold and mechanical, filtered through translation systems that turned his words into something humans could understand. Small vessels of the human species, you are surrounded and outgunned. Surrender now and your deaths will be swift. Rodriguez almost laughed. The aliens still thought they were dealing with a proper military force that might actually surrender. They had no idea they were about to fight people who had spent their entire careers being told they didn't matter. Ships that weren't supposed to work as well as they did, and tactics that existed nowhere in any military manual. She checked her chronometer. The alien fleet had spread out to search the asteroid field, breaking their perfect formation for the first time since the battle at Proxima Station. Individual ships were moving between the rocks, confident that their shields and weapons could handle whatever resistance they might encounter. That was exactly what Rodriguez had been waiting for. The first kill went to Captain Wong in the tiny corvette Scrappy. The alien heavy cruiser Dominion's Will was scanning a cluster of asteroids when Wong's ship came screaming out of nowhere, her engines running at triple their safe rating. The corvette was so small and moving so fast that the alien ship's targeting systems couldn't lock onto her. Wong had removed everything from her ship that wasn't essential: chairs, furniture, even most of the life support systems. Her crew wore spacesuits and breathed bottled air so she could pack every available space with explosives. She flew the Scrappy straight into the alien ship's engine bay and detonated everything at once. The explosion tore the Dominion's Will apart from the inside out. A ship that had helped destroy Morrison's fleet died in less than 3 seconds, killed by a patrol boat that was officially rated as minimal threat. In every alien database, Rodriguez smiled grimly as she watched the alien formation react to the attack. Their ships immediately moved to surround the debris field, looking for the attacker, but there was nothing left to find. Wong and her crew had known it was a suicide mission, and they'd accomplished exactly what they set out to do, the aliens. Predictive systems went into overdrive, trying to calculate where the next attack would come from. But how do you predict chaos? How do you prepare for tactics that don't exist? Captain Barnes in the Lucky Strike provided the answer. His converted mining ship emerged from behind an asteroid that the aliens had already scanned and marked as empty. The alien computers couldn't understand how a ship had appeared where their sensors said nothing existed, but Barnes had spent years hiding cargo from customs inspectors and knew every trick for masking heat signatures, the mining lasers that were supposed to cut through rock and metal for industrial purposes worked just as well on alien armor. Barnes targeted the joints where the enemy ship's hull sections connected, slicing through structural supports that had been designed to withstand energy weapons, but not the focused cutting power of mining equipment. The alien destroyer came apart, like a puzzle being taken apart by an expert, piece by piece, section by section, until there was nothing left but floating debris. Barnes disappeared back into the asteroid field before the other alien ships could even target him. Now the aliens were getting worried. Two of their ships had been destroyed by attacks that made no sense according to their tactical analysis programs. The humans weren't fighting like a military force at all. They were fighting like pirates, terrorists, desperate criminals who had nothing left to lose. Admiral Kethis ordered his ships to close ranks and advance more carefully. But that just made Rodriguez's job easier. The tighter the alien formation, the more ships she could hit with a single attack. The Defiance came at them from directly above, a direction that Space Combat Doctrine said was impossible because there was no up or down in zero gravity. But Rodriguez wasn't following Space Combat Doctrine. She was following the kind of three-dimensional thinking that came from 40 years of being told her ship couldn't do things that she knew perfectly well it could do. Thompson had pushed their weapons beyond every safety limit. The main guns were charging to levels that would probably destroy them after a few shots, but they only needed to fire once. The torpedo tubes were loaded with warheads that had been modified with spare reactor cores, turning each missile into a miniature nuclear bomb. Rodriguez picked her target carefully, the alien command ship at the center of their formation. It was 3 times the size of her destroyer and carried enough firepower to level a planet. But it had one weakness that its designers never anticipated. All that size and armor made it slow to maneuver. The Defiance dropped out of hyperspace less than 1,000 meters above the alien flagship, her guns already firing. At point-blank range, Thompson's overcharged weapons tore through shields that had shrugged off entire human fleets. The modified torpedoes punched through the alien hull and detonated inside, turning the massive ship into an expanding cloud of superheated gas. Rodriguez barely had time to enjoy the victory before enemy return fire started lighting up space around her. The Defiance's engines screamed as Thompson pushed them past their breaking point, sending the old destroyer diving toward the shelter of the nearest asteroid. Warning alarms filled the bridge as systems overloaded and failed, but they'd accomplished their mission. The alien flagship was gone, and with it went their coordination and confidence. Similar scenes played out across the battlefield as humanity's forgotten fleet revealed what desperation could accomplish. Captain Davis and the supply ship Endurance had filled her cargo bays with maintenance drones, each one carrying enough explosives to cripple a warship. She launched them in swarms that the alien point defense systems couldn't track, sending dozens of tiny kamikaze robots into enemy engine bays and weapon turrets. Captain Johnson's patrol boat, Relentless, had been modified with experimental stealth technology that the fleet had rejected as too unreliable for proper warships. It worked perfectly for hit-and-run attacks, letting him appear and disappear like a ghost while picking off isolated alien vessels. The converted cargo hauler Determination used her massive cargo capacity to carry asteroids, literally throwing rocks at alien ships using her industrial manipulator arms. The aliens' advanced shields could stop energy weapons and missiles, but nobody had programmed them to handle chunks of space rock moving at orbital velocity. For 18 hours, the battle raged across 100 million cubic kilometers of space. The aliens found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to follow any recognizable pattern of warfare. Every time their artificial intelligence systems tried to predict human behavior, the humans did something that no computer had ever calculated as possible. Ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting with systems that shouldn't have worked. Officers who had been written off as failures were outmaneuvering some of the galaxy's most advanced military technology. Weapons that were supposedly obsolete were punching through defenses that had never been penetrated before. By the time the alien survivors finally retreated toward the edge of human space, Rodriguez could barely believe what had happened. They'd done it. 15 ships that nobody took seriously had accomplished what humanity's greatest fleet could not. The impossible had become reality, and the galaxy would never be the same. The final phase of the battle began when the alien fleet tried to retreat. Admiral Kethis had lost over 400 ships to an enemy that shouldn't have been able to scratch his paint, and his remaining vessels were scattered across the asteroid field like leaves in a storm. For the first time in the aliens' long history of conquest, they were running from humans, but Rodriguez wasn't about to let them escape. These aliens had destroyed entire colonies, wiped out humanity's best fleet, and come to finish the job by attacking Earth itself. Now they wanted to retreat and regroup, probably to come back later with better tactics and more ships. She couldn't allow that to happen. The Defiance was barely holding together. Thompson's modifications had pushed every system beyond its breaking point, and the ship was running on borrowed time. Smoke filled the corridors where overloaded circuits had burned out. The main weapons were offline after their suicide attack. On the alien flagship, half the crew was injured from the violent maneuvers needed to avoid enemy fire, but the old destroyer still had fight left in her. Rodriguez ordered her remaining ships to pursue the fleeing aliens. Only 7 vessels from their original 15 were still combat capable, but they moved through the asteroid field like sharks following a blood trail. Each human ship had become something unique during the battle, transformed by damage and desperation into weapons their designers never imagined. Captain Barnes had turned the Lucky Strike into a rolling arsenal of improvised destruction. His mining ship's cargo bays were filled with every explosive device his crew could create from spare parts and industrial chemicals. When an alien cruiser tried to use an asteroid for cover, Barnes simply detonated the entire rock, turning it into a shotgun blast of superheated fragments that shredded the enemy vessel's hull. The corvette Scrappy was gone, sacrificed in Wong's heroic attack on the alien heavy cruiser. But her sister ship, the patrol boat Swift, had learned from Wong's example. Captain Peterson used his tiny vessel's speed and maneuverability to dart between the larger alien ships, planting explosive charges on their hulls like a mosquito delivering poison. Each successful attack weakened the alien formation and added to their growing panic. Thompson appeared on Rodriguez's command screen, his face streaked with grease and exhaustion. "Captain, I can give you one more attack run. Maybe 2 if we're lucky. After that, the reactor containment is going to fail and we'll be drifting dead in space," Rodriguez nodded. One attack run was all she needed. The alien fleet was trying to form up for a coordinated retreat, gathering their surviving ships into a defensive formation that would protect them during their escape to hyperspace. It was exactly the kind of predictable military behavior that had gotten Morrison's fleet destroyed, but Rodriguez had learned not to be predictable. Instead of attacking the aliens' defensive formation, she went after their escape route. The Defiance limped toward the hyperspace jump point that the aliens would have to use to flee the system. It was a desperate gamble that required her to arrive before the enemy fleet and somehow block their exit. Lieutenant Kim worked frantically at her tactical station, calculating firing solutions for weapons that were barely functional. "Captain, even if we reach the jump point first, we don't have enough firepower left to stop their entire fleet." "We don't need to stop them," Rodriguez replied. "We just need to make them think we can." The Defiance reached the jump point with minutes to spare. Thompson managed to restart their main weapons, though the power readings showed they would probably explode after a single shot. Rodriguez positioned her battered destroyer directly in the path of the fleeing alien fleet, like a single guard dog facing down a pack of wolves. When Admiral Kethis saw the human ship blocking his escape route, he couldn't believe what his sensors were telling him. 1 damaged destroyer against his remaining 50 ships? It had to be a trap. No military commander would make such an obviously suicidal gesture unless they had overwhelming backup hidden somewhere nearby. Kethis ordered his ships to scan for hidden human forces, convinced that Rodriguez was leading them into an ambush. His paranoid caution gave the other human ships time to catch up and join the Defiance at the jump point. 7 battered vessels against 50 alien warships. But the aliens had learned to fear what these humans could do when they were desperate. The standoff lasted for 27 minutes. Kethis kept expecting more human ships to appear, or some kind of super weapon to reveal itself, or any explanation for why these humans would throw their lives away in such an impossible fight. He didn't understand that Rodriguez and her crew had been throwing their lives away for their entire careers, taking on missions that proper officers wouldn't touch, keeping ships running that should have been scrapped decades ago. When the alien admiral finally gave the order to attack, His ships moved forward with none of their earlier confidence. They were expecting tricks, traps, some kind of human insanity that would turn their victory into disaster. Hesitation gave Rodriguez exactly the opening she needed. The Defiance fired everything she had left in a single, overwhelming barrage. Thompson had linked all their remaining power systems together, turning the old destroyer into a one-shot cannon that could punch through anything in space. The blast tore through 3 alien ships before the weapons overloaded and died forever. In that moment of chaos, the other human ships struck with everything they had learned during 18 hours of impossible combat. Barnes detonated his remaining explosives in a pattern that created a barrier of superheated debris across the jump point. Captain Davis launched every drone she had left, turning them into guided missiles that sought out enemy engine cores. Peterson used his patrol boat's speed to plant charges on the alien ship's hyperspace generators, trapping them in normal space where they couldn't escape. The final alien resistance collapsed like a house of cards. Ships that had conquered dozens of worlds found themselves outfought by human vessels that weren't supposed to exist. Admiral Kethis watched his mighty armada reduced to fewer than 30 functional ships, then 20. Then just a handful of damaged vessels desperately trying to reach any escape route that wasn't blocked by human defenders. When the last alien ship finally jumped to hyperspace, Rodriguez slumped in her captain's chair and tried to process what had happened. They'd done it. Against every possible odd, with ships that nobody respected and tactics that existed nowhere in any manual, they had saved humanity from extinction. The news of their victory spread across human space like wildfire. The colonies that had been preparing for invasion started celebrating instead. The fleet headquarters that had written off the Outer Rim as unimportant suddenly wanted to know everything about Rodriguez and her miracle fleet. The officers who had been overlooked for their entire careers became the most famous military heroes in human history, but Rodriguez wasn't thinking about fame or recognition as she watched Thompson's crew work to keep their dying ship from exploding. She was thinking about the 15 captains who had answered her call, knowing it was probably a suicide mission. 8 of them were dead now, but their sacrifice had saved billions of lives and proven that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their training. It was their refusal to give up. Even when the entire galaxy said they couldn't win, the Defiance limped back to the nearest human station, her engines barely functioning and her hull held together by Thompson's engineering genius and sheer stubborn determination. Other ships came out to escort her home, their crews standing at attention to salute the vessel that had saved them all. Rodriguez kept the Defiance as her flagship when they promoted her to admiral, even though she could have commanded any ship in the fleet. The old destroyer became the foundation of a new military doctrine that emphasized creativity over rigid procedures, adaptability over overwhelming force. The aliens never came back. Word of their defeat spread through the galaxy, carried by the few survivors who had witnessed humans doing impossible things with ships that shouldn't have worked. Other hostile races reconsidered their expansion plans when they learned what happened to forces that underestimated humanity's determination. In the end, it wasn't humanity's most advanced technology that saved them. It was the indomitable spirit of people who refused to accept that something was impossible, even when everyone else had given up hope. The vessel they never took seriously had become the most famous ship in human history, and her crew had proven that sometimes the best way to win is to fight like you have nothing left to lose.